The flagpoles in Derry's city cemetery selectively highlight those killed by the state during the Troubles. Tonight, Insight examines one of those killings, unearthing alarming new evidence that raises difficult questions for all on the nature of truth, justice and reconciliation in Northern Ireland.
This is an outrageous case, you know, which a 47-year-old married woman with 6 young children was shot down in her own garden, and the soldier who killed her has got off at the moment scot-free.
If that Pandora's box were to be opened, then who knows where it would end. And thousands of people would say whether they had close relatives murdered, whether they were seriously injured, whether they were traumatized. I mean, it's endless. It is absolutely endless.
I always thought it was a very strange situation because I went to bed a 9-year-old at 9 o'clock at night and got up in the same night, and life was never the same again. I mean, my world had gone.
November 1971, 3 months after the introduction of internment, 2 months before Bloody Sunday. In Londonderry, over 500 acres covering the estates of the Bogside and Creggan have been declared no-go areas for forces of the state. Entry to Free Derry, where the bulk of the city's Catholic population lives, is controlled by IRA checkpoints. The army, not the police, officially takes the lead in security matters, mounting regular sorties into enemy territory to arrest suspects and detain them without trial. De facto martial law, the official response to the spiralling lawlessness. In the early hours of the 6th of November, a platoon of around 30 soldiers from the Royal Green Jackets move into the Creggan to search a house on Rathlin Drive. They have orders to arrest any male within the house.
I remember sitting on the settee, and for whatever reason, I don't know what kind of a noise I heard, but I went straight to the window and looked across the street, and I could see the army going into a neighbour's house.
Running to her backyard in her bedroom slippers, Kathleen Thompson reaches for the metal bin lid that would signal the army's approach. But within minutes, the 47-year-old mother of 6 is dead, shot through the chest by a soldier's bullet.
My father said to me, "Will you go over to McGlinchey's and get your mother, because my grandmother lived with us?" And at that stage the CS gas was about and she was having difficulty breathing. So I ran across the street and went over into McGlinchey's, and I says, you know, "Is my mama there?" And he says, "No." So I came back and I thought it was a bit strange, and so did my father. She was lying just in the back garden, and I remember him shouting to somebody to come and help him. And at that stage then, I remember being in the hall, and the man, whoever it was, had brought the body in. I remember somebody saying, "She's dead."
I come up to the house and I was running in, and I heard somebody saying, "That's her son." And as I got to the front door, I intended to go out to the kitchen, usually just the first thing you head to, and somebody stopped me. He says, "Your father's up the stairs," but I didn't realise that my mom was still, the body was lying in the kitchen. So I come up the stairs and my father was up there, and he was kneeling down. I mind, he says to me, he was in tears, and he says to me, "I mind the first time I met her." And I lost it then after that. It was hard, you know, it was very hard.
Especially hard for the younger children, 2 of them under 10 years old, their mother taken from them as they slept in bed, now forced to confront the harsh reality of violent death.
I remember standing on the bottom stairs and checking in to the coffin, and I could see the cotton wool and with the bullet hole went down, and I could actually see. I remember thinking, why, you know, at 9, why is there cotton wool? You know, or does people get cotton wool or whatever? But it was when I read the autopsy report, I realised that, I mean, the bullet actually had entered her neck. It's ridiculous that we waited 30 years.
It's only now in adulthood, prompted by questions from their own children, that members of the Thompson family have faced their past, enlisting the help of rights group, the Pat Finucane Centre, to investigate their case.
She was killed in the back garden, so when you like to play in the back garden you played, you're always very aware that that's where she was killed, or that's where she died. In your mind it was always there. And now that being the age that I am now, I look at my own youngsters and I think I would be horrified at the idea. And that they would lose me or I would lose them.
But seeking to lay their own ghosts to rest raises spectres for others.
I suppose there are a number of objections. I would have an objection and need some questions answered in relation to any case that had lain dormant, as it were, for 30 years or thereabout. And then suddenly people want answers. And one would imagine that if questions were demanding, if there was a demand for questions to be answered, they would be demanded at the time of the killing and immediately thereafter, certainly in the first year or two. I would imagine that would be at the point at which the demand would be at its highest. If 30 years elapses and there's no demand or no pressure, no group swaying in behind them, and then suddenly after that period of time, I have to ask why.
Because my youngsters are asking me questions about why, and I can't answer their questions. And they're asking me the same questions that I asked when I was 9 and 10. And now because of the peace process has moved on, and it's a better time for us as well. But it's taken a next generation to start asking questions.
One leading member of the civil rights movement who attended Mrs Thompson's funeral believes it's important that the family gets answers now.
The Thompson family need not worry about raising this issue now, because this was a terrible injustice which has to be righted as far as it can be. It will never be righted for them, but it's an injustice which should be exposed, and I don't think that there would be any worries on the part of those who campaign for that about any possible retribution by the state or anyone else.
Do not fire back for the moment, unless you identify a positive target.
At the time of the killing, the Northern Ireland Troubles were in their infancy. Bloody Sunday, just 2 months away, would set a new level against which civilian deaths caused by the state would be measured.
Father, how many dead have you seen in the Bogside?
Appearing to be dead, there are the 3 in that Saracen car. There are 2 men lying at the end of this block of flats. There's another man at least very close to being dead. There are 2 others up there. I'm told that there are some more in these flats here that I haven't seen yet. I would say there are probably about 4 dead at this moment. I don't know what those are doing, whether they're alive or dead, but they seem to be very dead, and they're thrown in as if they were dead meat.
But for now, the killing of an unarmed mother in her own home was one of the worst incidents in recent memory. Had the family been so inclined, Kathleen Thompson could have become a powerful martyr for the Republican cause. But she had been an active champion of non-violent protest, and her husband was determined to preserve that legacy.
From memory, I would think within about 2 hours, I was in the house, and I met Paddy Thompson, Kathleen Thompson's husband. I must say that I carry the memory to this very day. I couldn't understand why I didn't see more anger in the house, because here a mother had been shot down. He had found her dead in the backyard of the home, and yet there was almost a degree of acceptance by the family that this terrible event had occurred. There was nothing they could do about it.
When she died then, it was hard on us. It was very, very hard. It was very, very hard on my father, because we've all done everything in the house, really. You know, well, I'd say the cooking, but she just done the general run of the house, and he was totally lost. When I come in from work at night, he used to go up in the bathroom and cry. You know, I knew when I was going up the stairs, he was going up, and we stood outside and could hear him crying in the bathroom, like.
It was pretty difficult at certain times, but not talking about it was a good thing, because basically you weren't releasing any hurt. So it was like that. I think we were all getting protected by the fact that we didn't speak about it, and it was the best way to handle it at the time.
These were dangerous times. Asking too many questions would mark the family out as agitators, and the threat of internment loomed large. Patrick Thompson would not even mark his wife's grave, lest it damage the chances of an official investigation into her death.
My father made a determined effort. This is that he decided he wasn't going to put up a headstone, because he says his attitude was, I'm giving them nothing to say about your mother. Where IRA supported on, he was determined that if they were going to have a case against my mother, it wasn't because what he thought he put up in a headstone.
But it was the inability to get to the truth, as much as the killing itself, that destroyed Mr Thompson and leaves the family today demanding answers that were never given at the inquest.
They called my father up and he stood up to speak, and it just says, answer questions, yes or no. And I was there for about 2 minutes, just up and down, and then somebody from the Army Investigation Branch got up and read 4 statements and it was over. And I looked at him and I thought to myself, you know, you depended so much on this, and it was a joke. It actually was a joke. They returned an open verdict, and that was the end of it.
The depositions of 4 soldiers, known only as A, B, C and D, were entered at the inquest. Soldier D fired the fatal shots. Indeed, he was the only soldier to fire at all.
I turned around and saw a flickering light and the figure of a person behind the fence of 129 Rathlin Drive. I also heard some voices coming from the area to the rear of 129 Rathlin Drive. An object was then thrown in my direction. I did not see where it landed or what it was. I then took aim with my SLR at a figure behind the fence and fired 2 rounds. I could not confirm a hit, but the figure disappeared as soon as I had fired.
Soldier D, by his own evidence, couldn't see what he was firing at. Luckily for him, one of his colleagues, Soldier C, could.
On looking towards the fence at the rear of 129 Rathlin Drive, I saw a male person holding what appeared to be a .22 rifle. Behind this man were 2 to 3 other people, one of which was a female. I know this because one of them was wearing a skirt. I took aim at the gunman with my SLR, but then I heard fire 2 shots and saw the gunman slump towards the fence. I then heard a woman scream. I did not fire any shots.
But the figure later found slumped dead in the backyard of 129 Rathlin Drive was no gunman. It was Kathleen Thompson. Her weapon, a bin lid. Her uniform, brown cardigan, pink polo neck and blue tweed skirt. Billy Thompson unwittingly passed his mother's killer on the road as he returned home that night.
The 3 soldiers that was in front of me, one of them shot my mother and got away with it. I mean, there was no we've had no redress about it, no answers, not even a police investigation. And I think it's about been only for Erin. I mean, we let it go. As I say, it was the family never talked about it. Okay, it was to protect more of the youngsters. But when I would say a time would have came, as it's come now, that we'd have to answer some of their questions, and they need answered now.
But it's a landmark ruling from the European Court of Human Rights that has opened the way for the family to challenge the authorities' failure to conduct a full investigation into the death.
Well, the position is that that people are always entitled to have a proper investigation into deaths by the British Army or the RUC. But it was only recently, last May, in which the European Court ruled on the question. It was the first time it was brought before that court, and that court ruled that these cases now must have a proper public investigation and a proper public inquiry into the circumstances, and that an inquest system as it wasn't sufficient. But the inquest system lasted 30 years.
The family has this week sought leave for a judicial review to put the Director of Public Prosecutions in the dock, essentially challenging him to explain why no one was charged in connection with the killing. Action is also being taken against the Secretary of State.
Kathleen Thompson was shot dead by a soldier who was called Soldier D. In a statement to the police, he said that he fired at an unidentified target behind a fence. Now, it's almost unbelievable that the DPP did not direct a prosecution in those circumstances.
The official line has always been that Kathleen Thompson died in crossfire between the IRA and the Army. But there was no apparent attempt by officials to verify these claims. It was left to a non-violent action group, Derry Citizens Central Council, to conduct the only investigation.
I wrote most of the statements, and I was used to going to scenes of that nature. Although I must say that Mrs Thompson's killing moved me, and still does, more than I can say, because of the circumstances of the family. left without a mother. And I knew that even if we got what they wanted, what everybody wanted was the soldiers brought to justice, it still wouldn't bring their mother back.
Derry Citizens Central Council's informal investigation concluded there was no crossfire at the time, in spite of army claims. Mrs Thompson died for expressing, in the only non-violent way she could, her protest against repression. Kathleen Thompson had been banging a bin lid, enough in some quarters to mark her out as an IRA sympathiser.
It may not be terribly acceptable in the Malone Road in Belfast, but one of the things that you've got to remember is that when you're involved in a civil rights campaign, a non-violent campaign, you've got to get people actively involved in acts of protest which are essentially non-violence, but where people are able to participate and express their anger at what is happening. So what has been set up in nationalist areas throughout Northern Ireland, where there was likely to be people lifted for and interned, what you had was a web of people organised to blow whistles, to bang bin lids, to carry out any other form of protest.
Regardless of the brutality of the killing, the feeling at the time was one of powerlessness. During your investigation, did you liaise at any stage with the authorities?
No.
Why not?
Well, I knew it was pointless because the police had no control over the army, and the army were the ones who had shot Mrs Thompson, so it was largely a waste of time going through that channel. But what I did instead was, when I made sure of all the facts, I then issued a public statement which was carried on all the newspapers and the Irish News in Belfast, explaining what had happened, and in that way putting pressure on the authorities to take the steps that were necessary.
And did the authorities take those steps?
Not to my knowledge.
Did they take any steps?
Not to my knowledge.
Well, as far as you're aware, did the authorities have any formal investigation into the death and killing of Mrs Thompson?
I wasn't aware of any, and they certainly didn't contact me about it.
So really all the family had was a statement conducted by an amateur group printed in the local papers?
That's correct, yeah.
Is that justice?
It certainly wasn't justice in my book. No, it wasn't. It was a rank injustice. It's bad enough to kill Mrs Thompson, but not to follow up in the ordinary course of events in the case of a death like that was outrageous.
Even those who supported Kathleen Thompson's cause of civil rights acknowledge they failed to properly highlight her death.
There was a whole fury of activity. But when I think back on it, if Kathleen Thompson had died, for example, now, there would have been undoubtedly been a different type of representation. There was so much happening, and Kathleen Thompson's death was then overtaken by the terrible events of Bloody Sunday. And when I look back on it now, I would be the first person to accept that enough emphasis was not pursued or placed on her death and the terrible way that she met her end.
It's clear from the headlines that the killing of Kathleen Thompson was a traumatic event. On the day it happened, Saturday the 6th of November 1971, it was the front page story in the Irish News. But by the Monday morning, that had been replaced by the shooting dead of a young soldier. And on Tuesday, her funeral was marked by a front page photograph, but just 4 paragraphs of copy on page 3. These were turbulent times, with each new horror obliterating the memory of the last. Kathleen Thompson's death became one of just many in the unfolding conflict, to be measured in mountains of newsprint and recorded in fading headlines. For younger members of the Thompson family, taking action now is partly about reclaiming a memory of a mother they never really had. When you think about your mother now, do you have strong memories? Do you have vivid memories?
No, just 1 or 2 now. Just as she passes me in a bus coming out of school, and I waved there and she waves back, and a Saturday night getting called for a bath. No, just there when Doctor Who was on, you get called for a bath. Bar that, nothing.
What does it feel like to you now to have those very vague memories and that's all you have?
Oh, I I try not to think too much about them because of what they have and I haven't. So most of all the things I know about my mother is all through listening to them talking and aunts and uncles talking about her. But as my own personal memories of her are very few.
Through the Pat Finucane Centre, the family began seeking all official information on their mother's killing and its investigation. But they soon discovered that to the police, Kathleen Thompson's death wasn't even worthy of keeping a file. The soldiers were only interviewed for half an hour each, not by the police, but by a military colleague.
A policeman never took a statement. I mean, a woman was, as far as I'm concerned, she was murdered in the backyard. And they took 2 hours, was it even 2 hours? Half an hour.
2 hours.
And it wasn't even taken by a policeman. I mean, the basic law tells you a policeman has to investigate a crime, or a sudden death, or a violent death. The RUC never did that. No, and they're still saying they have no files.
The police service says the Thompson file is lost, yet the chief constable maintains that there was an actual and acceptable investigation into her death.
Oh, he's joking. You know, he can't be serious. You know, like, did a policeman go down and talk to the soldiers? Now, that's a minimum. I mean, they should have done. The least he should have done was send a policeman down to that barracks and say, here, I want your statement. They didn't even do that. It was the British Army and the military police. So that wasn't the law at the time. They were under the law of the RUC. I mean, the RUC was supposed to do this. They didn't do it. Why, was it laziness? Or was it just a Catholic victim living in Creggan? Nothing. You know, that's the injustice of it to me. They didn't care.
The loss of documents and lack of evidence of any police investigation bears a striking resemblance to the case of murdered nationalist councillor Patsy Kelly, investigated by Insight last year.
Well, we had exactly the same situation in the Patsy Kelly case. We were assured by senior police officers that there were sufficient investigation papers available to conclude that a proper investigation had taken place. But gradually, as the evidence unfolded in terms of meetings with senior police officers, it became clear that in fact there was nothing in terms of documentation upon which the assertion that there had been a proper investigation could possibly have been based.
On the eve of the Insight programme on the Kelly case, the police, having initially maintained that they had lost the file, claimed they had found it. But they have yet to tell the Kelly family what, if anything, the file contains. It's this attitude of stonewalling which leads some to the conclusion that it was common practice in the early part of the Troubles not to investigate any deaths where security services may have been involved.
That would appear to have been the case. Whether or not there was even a suggested proper legal basis for the killing having taken place in the first instance. In the Patsy Kelly case, it was clearly murder, but it seems that the same plan of action swung into operation in terms of the failure or refusal to properly investigate.
In a remarkable case of déjà vu for Insight, the police today revealed the Thompson file has been found. They say a file was submitted in 1972 to the Chief Crown Solicitor, and that in August of that year the DPP directed no prosecution. It's news to the family and their solicitor.
The family were told that that the file had been lost, and that was it, and nothing further could be done about it. And it's only when investigative journalists start looking into the matter that all of a sudden the file can be found. So I think that's concerning. It's almost as if, you know, the police are saying, well, we can't find the file, so there's nothing we can do about it, goodbye. And in fact, now we have a situation in which you have been told that the file has been found. I want to look at it. I want to determine whether or not it is the full file. And I also want to know why the family had been told that there wasn't a file, that the file had been lost.
Ultimately, the significance of the Thompson file will depend on what it contains. Damning evidence due to be aired at the Bloody Sunday inquiry and included in the Thompsons' legal challenge has been obtained by Insight. It's a statement from a retired army major in the military police, in which he claims that it was official policy for the RUC not to investigate military offences. Apparently, an agreement was reached in 1970 between the GOC of the Army and the Chief Constable that military police, RMP, would tend to military witnesses and the RUC to civilian witnesses.
With both RMP and RUC sympathetic to the soldier, who, after all, was doing an incredibly difficult job, he was highly unlikely to make a statement incriminating himself, for the RMP investigator was out for information for managerial, not criminal purposes.
In other words, incidents such as Kathleen Thompson's killing were treated as matters for internal military housekeeping. This cosy arrangement ended under direct rule in 1972, when a new Director of Public Prosecutions described it as far from satisfactory. It's this apparent pattern of behaviour in a whole series of controversial killings which makes the case being taken by the Thompson family so fundamental.
Well, there are many other cases, of course. There are hundreds of cases that are, as far as the European ruling is concerned, there were 4 cases before the court, but they were cases that are similar right across the spectrum of deaths by the security forces over 30 years, and there are hundreds of those cases. And so each one of them is an individual case, and each one of them now, I think, requires proper investigation.
With the spiralling costs of the Savile inquiry into Bloody Sunday making headlines, the potential impact of the Thompson case becomes clear in monetary terms alone.
Now, are we opening up a paradise for lawyers to all become multi-millionaires? Because that's what the outcome of the Savile inquiry is going to be. And if the Pandora's box is opened in relation to Mrs Thompson, it would have to be opened for a whole range of others. And where does one draw the line in relation to that? If there has been no demand for 30 years and now suddenly there's going to be a demand for hundreds, if not thousands of people.
The Thompson family have won important political support in the Irish government. A personal letter from Bertie Ahern notes serious questions are raised about the investigation and pledges to raise the matter with the British government. Unionists see cases like Kathleen Thompson as part of a wider nationalist agenda and argue that if inquiries are to be opened, then they must also look at the actions of the IRA, including the murky history of the arms trial in the Republic.
Unionists hear nationalists saying, let's put the past behind us, and then they hear those same nationalists say, no, but we want to go back to the past. We want to drag it up, have it resurrected, investigated, dissected, and brought in front of the public domain for all to see that the British were to blame for this. And yet when Unionists demand the same, no, we can't have that.
But for the Thompson family, seeking the truth now is not about political point scoring. It's about growing up.
That part of your life, you never grow up from that part of your life. You're still very much protected at 9. When I speak about my mother's death, I speak about her as a 9-year-old. I don't speak about her as a woman at 40. I speak of a 9-year-old memories. And I think at this stage of our life, all of our life, that we need to speak as an adult with the truth.
For 3 decades, Kathleen Thompson's killing had been forgotten by her family, forced to forget in order to get on with their lives in dangerous circumstances, by her political supporters caught up in the fury of events, by the authorities so convinced of its insignificance that a full investigation was never carried out. But a new generation's need to remember has raised uncomfortable questions for all. The significance of the Thompson file may yet prove profound.